Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. This week we're going to be talking about democracy. I'm going to split the slides into two parts. So this is the part one. After I go through these slides, there's a few questions about the benefits and the harms of democracy I'd like you to answer on the assignment democracy. And then there's Quizlet again. The second part will be a little different this week. So let's start with an overview of what the word means. Demos comes from Greek meaning common people, and kratos, like the other power structure, means to rule or to command. So if you put it together, it means ruled by the people. And to the right, I put a picture of the Iroquois nation, and this was a nation of Native Americans that existed when our founding fathers of the United States were coming up with a system of democracy. We're writing the Constitution, and it's debated how much influence they had over when we were coming up with our structure. But it is known that they did influence because of how they ran a kind of a federacy, a group of different tribes that came together to govern. Like we have a group of different states that come together to govern a big group of people. So, in essence, democracy believes that humans are fundamentally equal and ought to be able to manage their affairs. So here are some of the key elements from it. Popular sovereignty, and that is the belief that people have the right to make decisions themselves, that there shouldn't be one person or a small group of people in charge of everyone else, but people have the right to make decisions for themselves. The second idea is that it's a free and fair process, that there are ways in which decisions are made and it's done in a way that people can exchange ideas, and there's an impartial, meaning that no one's favored, process to do this, such as elections. The third key principle is active participation, that people can actively participate in this process. In our democracy, and in many democracies, they talk about the people who participate are the citizens. So that's key because in many democracies, not everyone is a citizen. And the last key element of this is rights and liberty, that in a democracy there is a protection of the rights of the people to protect their participation, or protection of the rights of the citizens to be able to participate in these processes. So there are two types of democracies in general, right? There's a direct one where people govern themselves, or where the citizens govern themselves, or a representative democracy in which people elect others to represent them and make decisions for them. It's also called a republic. So if we go back to other influences beyond the Iroquois, we would be looking at direct democracy, would be an influence of Athenian democracy of the Greeks, or representative democracy. You might find examples of that. Often people talk about in Rome. So the way in which democracies make decision, there are many different ways, and we see these throughout the world. There are consensus, and I'll go over whatever these are in the next slide. Majority rules, which is probably the one you hear a lot of. We use this in the classroom a lot when we vote. right? Whoever the greatest number, they will, the decision will be made in their favor. Or proportional representation. So let's look a little bit more at these in depth. So for direct democracy, these are the types of processes you might see. A consensus. So a consensus is when you have a group of people and they're making a decision, but in a consensus, everyone has to agree on it. So in order for a decision to be made completely, everyone has to participate and they have to share their ideas and engage in a dialogue. So this process can take quite a while, especially if you want to convince everyone to go to agree. But that's consensus. The second type of process used in a direct democracy is majority rules. And that holds where the decision of the group is decided according to whichever decision or whoever, if you're voting for a person, receives the majority of the votes. Sometimes we also use a supermajority, and we use this a lot in our government, our federal and our state governments, where you have to agree on, it's more than 50%, it has to be at least 60%. A lot of times you'll see, sometimes it can be 75%. So the thing about a majority rule is it doesn't guarantee that the minority opinions are heard. So if there's a few people who have a different idea, sometimes they're overlooked because it won't matter in the long run if most people are following one decision. All right, so for the next type of democracy, representative democracy, right, where people elect others to represent them, there are three options for making a decision. The consensus, where everyone has to agree on the decision to be made. Majority rules, where the majority of the group or the supermajority of the group agrees on one decision. Or, and this is one we don't tend to use as much, or in the United States, I've seen this more in other countries, and that is a proportional representation. And that requires at least two choices to exist. So a lot of times where you'll see this is in countries for seats in a Senate for people to represent them. They will have, people will vote, and the proportion of the party that gets the most votes will get that many seats. So if you had like a Democrats were 30%, they would get 30% of the seats, and the Republicans voted 30%, then they would get another 30%, and then that, let's say the last 40% were independents, and then they would take 40% of the seats, so equaling 100%. So that is, that's often how proportional representation works. So here's a chart, again, summarizing some of the major takeaways from these different processes. Consensus, it requires society to value and prioritize collaboration. You have to be able to collaborate in order to make a decision and have good communication skills. All voices can be heard. You can't be anonymous in your position, and it usually takes a long time. Majority rules requires society to be responsible for learning about the issues, the candidates, and the parties. Everyone can vote in a true democracy, right? Everyone, all the citizens can. Again, it depends on, in a country, who's allowed to be a citizen. Like, for example, in the United States, it first started that pretty much only white males could vote. And, well, they could be citizens. It wasn't until a while until they added actually black men next, and then women. Majority rules, you could be anonymous about your position. and it can be fairly fast for decision making. And it's used often in democracies where you have huge populations. I don't see how you could do consensus in a population when you're talking about millions of people, unless you're doing it with representatives. And then proportional representation. Again, it requires society to be responsible for learning about the issues, candidates, and parties. Everyone's vote counts towards their chunk of the outcome. So you get more minority voices in proportional representation. You can be anonymous about your position or vote. And however, it only applies in situations where the vote can result in multiple outcomes. So if you have an either yes, no situation, a proportional representation, decision making will not work. All right, so here is the activity for the first part of this week. You respond to this in the in Schoology under the democracy assignment, right? You can write in the comments sections like we've done in the past about democracy. What are the benefits to the individual? What are the harms to the individual of democracy? And also, what are the benefits to how society works, and what are the harms? So take a few minutes to respond to that. Post your comments, and then you can move on to Quizlet for this week and practice it until you can master it. All right, I'm going to stop then and here, and I will come back for the second part of our slides.